guys and girls, Bored Now back with you for another episode of the What We've Been Watching This Month thingy. Yeah, we still don't have a better title than that. This is for September. My guest this month is Alyssa from Horror Movie Tea podcast. Hey, Alyssa.
Hey, everyone.
How's it going? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be on.
Yep, so this is the second edition. In case you missed the August edition, I did it with my chums at Yellow Jackets Hive podcast, so you can check out that episode now. Alyssa has agreed to be in the firing line this month.
You forced my hand.
I did, yeah. There was no one else, so I was desperate. Come through a bunch of TV shows and movies that we've been watching the past month, and we're going to recommend, or maybe not recommend them, depending on our thoughts, just some of what we think of them. And we'll also let you know where you can find them, stuff like that. Maybe stuff that's on our radar. Would like you guys to let us know in the comments what you've been watching this past month. You'll notice a fancy red banner going across the bottom of the screen. That is just my details. If you want to sign up to my patreon.com/borednow, where you can support the channel monetarily and get a bunch of extra perks. But we're going to make a start. So Alyssa, if you want to start with your first film pick.
I watched this on Friday. I watched Elemental.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, like, I'm not going to say it's a great film, but it's a pretty decent, solid film. Like it gives you some feel goods. It definitely touches on kind of like Zootopia, where it kind of touches on themes of racism. Elemental touches on prejudice, racism, immigration. But I will say the animation is the way that they animated the fire and the water is so cool. And some of the creativity with how the elements live in the same city. So it's some really awesome creative choices, but it's I would definitely recommend the movie as a one watch, but it's not like a classic I'd stick with.
A funny time at the moment because their movies aren't doing as well as they used to, and yeah. I think that's why they've gone back to the Toy Story route, where we're going to get a fifth Toy Story. But yeah. I mean, to me, I've not seen this one yet, but their movies are always worth at least one watch, I find.
Yeah.
You know, you can normally rely on the animation at least being good. So.
Say, at least in the first half, I really got Zootopia copycat vibes because the town that they had set up and things like that, it really did feel like Zootopia and their city that they created. But then they kind of switched it and really made it about the character and making sure that it's about her staying true to herself, and it ended up morphing into being a different film, which of course was preferable. But yeah, it's that first half of is this going to be a Zootopia copycat? But then it ended up being kind of shifting away from that, luckily.
Yeah. And that's obviously still on general release right now, so if you guys want to go and check it out, if not, it will be on Disney Plus before long, because they normally go up pretty quickly. So
yeah, that's where I watched it. It's on at least for the US, it's on Disney Plus right now. So
okay, so it's already gone up. Okay, I've been watching quite a lot of horror movies because I'm getting ready, of course, for the spooky season, and me and my co-host have been recording episodes early. So some of them I won't really mention, or I won't talk too much about here because I'm doing reviews for them. But I've been doing some Hammer horror. So me and Rachel, we're about to start a Frankenstein season because we like to do franchises, so that's our next big franchises. So I will just give that a plug. Then one of the reviews you can expect in October is the original 1930s Frankenstein with Boris Karloff. So yeah, I recently watched that on stream and we've recorded a review for that. So that's just to entice you for October. That's one of the reviews you can expect. We also did an Australian movie called Sissy, which, again, I won't spoil my thoughts, but that's worth a look. That's on Shudder. So if you've got Shudder, that's quite easy to get hold of. And yeah, a bunch of other things, but that's just a little tease for October. But speaking of Hammer Horror, one I can talk, not Hammer Horror, sorry, the Universal Monsters horror. One I can talk about is that I did a rewatch of Dracula, the original version of Dracula, with Bela Lugosi, and there's not too much to say about this one really, which hasn't been said, but I think it's still one of the best versions of Dracula. I still think Lugosi is one of the best Draculas maybe ever, because I think without doing very much, he just has an eerie presence to him. It's almost like it's just the way he delivers the lines and the way he's captured in like creepy sort of shadows, which just make him so scary and like unpredictable. And I've not read the book, but I know this is pretty faithful to the book from what I've heard, and it's just one of those things that was like ahead of its time and the basics, and like there's one or two moments that are definitely dated and a little bit hammy compared to nowadays, but I can enjoy a good bit of ham, and the story works for what it is and for the time period, and during this time period, like setting it in like this like Gothic style castle, like that was pretty unique at the time. And at least the main characters, they definitely stand out as being quite distinct. So the original Dracula, I think, holds up as still one of the best versions of that. So yeah.
It's like I need to make a list of all of the movies you've watched, because it's like every time you talk about a movie you've watched, you really make me want to watch it too.
Yeah.
It's like I've only the closest to the original Dracula that I've gotten is Nosferatu, which arguably kind of still counts, but I think I definitely need to watch the original Dracula.
Yeah, it's worth watching for sure. And quite short as well, as these movies were back then. So yeah, quite an easy watch as well. Over to you.
So I'm going to, because the next three movies that I watched were all a part of the same franchise. And so the first movie that I watched was Bad Ben, which was a movie that that me and my co-host have reviewed. The story behind the Bad Ben franchise is this guy always had the dream of being a director, and his mother was living with him, and because she was being taken care of by a nurse to kind of make sure that the nurse was doing everything she was supposed to, he put cameras all around his house. Well, his mother passed away, and he is like, well, what do I do with all of these cameras? He's like, I'm going to make a movie. So he literally made his own horror movie by utilizing the cameras that were already set up in his house. But it's like the guy, I think he's from New Jersey, but it's like he's just got like a great personality, and he's the one. I don't know if you've seen the game, but they made a Bad Ben game, and there's literally a button that's called like the like awareness button or something like that, and it's him cussing. and so it's like, but that game very much epitomizes the movie itself, where it's like, you know, the actual like the actual like what happens in the movie is he buys a house from a quote unquote sheriff's cell. he comes back to the house and is trying to like flip it, and all of this like paranormal stuff happens. But it's like some of the effects, the fact that he did it all by himself, some of the effects are like really impressive. And the fact that he has like a fairly cohesive storyline, which is pretty difficult, I feel like, for like C movies to have. So it's like, I will say Bad Ben is probably not for everybody, but if you enjoy like homemade movies and do appreciate like really like terrible movies, Bad Ben, it's definitely one to look at.
So it fits into the so bad it's good kind of genre.
Exactly. Like the guy, he just has such a personality. Like, I don't know if you want me to go ahead and shout out the other two movies that are along with the franchise, but there's a scene in like two of them that's like, oh my God, like it's just, you just have these moments where you're just like laughing out loud because it's just like so ridiculous, but it's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, you might as well mention the other two.
Sure. So the other two is Bad Ben Haunted Highway, and that one.
I like the subtitle.
Is he becomes a Lyft driver or a share ride driver, and he's like dropping people off at all of these like locations, and so but it's like it's always like some weird shit that's happening. Either like he drops a person off to become the food of a vampire, or he drops someone off to be like to go to some like sort of cult meeting. But like the one with the vampire, like the whole theme throughout the movie is he keeps saying like, please rate me 5 stars. Like, I really need this job. Please rate me 5 stars. And so so he ends up circling back to the area where he had dropped the guy off, that the vampire was trying to eat. And so he ends up saving the guy, and he's like, I just saved your life. Please give me 5 stars. And it's just like really, really stupid, silly shit like that. So definitely really enjoy Haunted Highway. And then the third one that I had to watch, which like watching now, like so many years, 3 years after the pandemic, it's just like really like surreal, but it's Bad Ben Pandemic. And this one's really creative because he essentially had, I guess it's maybe different supporters of his movie. They created their own or recorded their own segment of them calling into him saying, this is my issue. And it can either be COVID or it can be paranormal. But like the line between the two becomes really blurred. So like, for example, someone did like a zombie, and he's like, oh yeah, that's for sure COVID. That's not paranormal. But that one's really fun. The fact that you can see, so he's, he kind of became popular from like a home movie that he made, and he's also retroactively like supporting people that are sending in these recordings that they did on their webcam, creating their own paranormal. So it's just like a really fun, like seeing how creative people get with the effects and stuff like that. Amazon has been kind of difficult because initially the Bad Ben series, all of them were free. But now they've started charging them money. But like it's weird because now they've also been like, oh well, if you're not in a particular region, you can't watch it, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I know that it has like it's on it's really on Amazon that you can find them.
Quite old, although a little bit more up to date. But my next one is a film that I'm randomly just picked up when I was at Fright Fest last month. Like, they have a store where you get like vintage DVDs and special editions, and so this one I just decided to take a punt on because I think I'd heard the title before, but didn't know much about the film. And it's described in the write-up as like a forgotten Hammer horror movie. So it's from the early 60s, and it's called The Shadow of the Cat. So from about 1961. And yeah, gave it a watch. And this also, I think, definitely falls into that guilty pleasure type mode, because the plot is just so silly and so wild, and the way it plays out, like, you just can't take it seriously. But like, in a way, it's just good, like, campy fun, and you just enjoy it on that level. So the plot is then this woman is killed because of she owns like a rich sort of estate, I should say, if I can get it out. So that becomes like the motivation for why these family members have had her bumped off, because they want her money. But the twist is then the only witness to it is the cat of the title, so her cat, so the black cat. So the whole hijinks of the movie is them trying to pursue this cat because it's the only witness, and trying to have it killed off. So obviously maybe not a movie for cat lovers, although maybe a movie for cat lovers, because of course they're so dim-witted they can't ever catch the cat. And it just leads to like these like over-the-top cartoony deaths that are caused by this cat, and at the same time it's being investigated. But you see what I mean? It's the sort of thing you can't take like seriously or like literally, but it's a lot of fun. It's good, solid fun. Like it's not going to change your life, but it's one of those where the premise and some of the scenes are just so silly, then you definitely have a good time with it. And it's just a fun little setup of these like really nasty, dim-witted like family members. Because you get the one, I think she's like another relative, like she's either like a sister-in-law or something like that, and she is more sympathetic because she's not in on the plot. Like she's naturally just upset and grieving and has no idea what these other scoundrels are up to, so she's a bit more sympathetic. But the rest of them are just, I guess, like you think of this era of cinema, so just like very cartoony and quite hammy, sort of like posh British sort of characters that you maybe get in this era. So watching them kind of stumble over each other to try and get to this cat and try and kill it and just screwing up is actually really funny to watch. So it's solid. It's a solid fun time, I'd say. That's The Shadow of the Cat.
I feel like 60s and 70s movies are pretty good for having some good campiness.
Yeah. Okay.
So the next movie, this one I was kind of really late to the game on, and I finally watched The Batman.
Nice.
And I don't know how to feel about it. It's like, I do like some of the things that they did, like the whole like lenses being able to like record stuff, like that was really cool. And some of the just kind of like some of the choices that they made that kind of made it seem more plausible in our universe. But I will say I did not enjoy the Batman suit that they made. It just, I don't know. It looked too, at least for me, it looked a little bit too blocky. But I will say I appreciate the fact that Robert Pattinson could actually like move his neck and stuff to fight. Like whenever he fought, it seemed like he had like full range of movement. And so the fight scenes looked really, really great. Still don't know how I felt about him being Bruce Wayne, because it's like, I don't know. He kind of plays like almost like a emo Bruce Wayne in a way. Yeah. But it's like he did a good job. I mean, he's obviously a very talented actor, so it's like it's not like he did a terrible job or anything. It's just like, with Batman, it's so interesting. I was thinking about this while I was watching the movie. It's like whenever you look at the original comics or the original TV show that came out about Batman, is very like campy and like whoop pow, like, you know, very classic like superhero stuff. And it's just like gotten darker and darker and darker. They're just like, how dark can we take this before no one watches anymore? um, but it's like I do feel like they were able to successfully make it an even darker film than I feel like even with the oh man, I'm terrible
Dark Knight
with
trilogy.
yeah, it's like I feel like they even made it darker than that series, and they did it successfully. But yeah, it's like I would say it's like there's so many other Batman movies that I would say that if you're sick of Batman movies, it's okay to skip this one. It's not so revolutionary, but if you like Batman movies, it's worth a watch.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting you say about the suit, because I know that's been a complaint in other versions that like it just looks really stiff and like you can't move in that thing. So that's good to hear. But I will say, like, if you are a hardcore Batman fan, like if you're a fan of the comics and stuff, then it does seem like this film has satisfied that audience. Like they do seem that this feels like a very authentic take on that a couple of times now, and I really liked it. Like I was engrossed all the way through. Some great characters. I thought Patterson was well cast, and the Catwoman was very good in this, because again it was back to her almost being like a burglar type character, which is in the roots of that character, and she felt very sort of like grounded compared with some other versions you've got. And Penguin was very good. I mean, the makeup stuff with Farrell was insane, where he sort of looked more like Robert De Niro than he did like Colin Farrell, really. But there's some great set pieces. The ending was a bit weird. Like I don't know quite how I feel about the ending. We won't really spoil it here in case people haven't seen it. But yeah, the twist didn't quite hit me the way they were trying to like make it this massive gotcha type twist. Like that didn't quite land for me the way it has for some people. So
but it's like I will say, like storyline wise, something that this movie was really strong at was like with the Dark Knight series, especially like the movie with like Bane in it, and probably the first one too, to be fair. I will say that like the storyline, the movies were so long that like would lose me and then it'd get me back once it's like towards the end. But this movie, it was just they just kept it enough of a mystery that it like continued to be interesting, because I feel like some Batman movies have the fault of revealing too much about what's going on too early, and so you've kind of lost the mystery of it. Well, this one they kind of held it off a little bit longer, and so it kind of like kept me engaged and wanting to find out more about what was happening. So I really didn't have the lull in like storyline or attention span in this movie that I did with a few of the Dark Knight movies. So definitely does a really good job in capturing my attention, even though it is about the same length. It's a pretty long movie.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to say. Like, I didn't really feel the length because it is close to 3 hours, but like I just felt it so immersive, and I got into the suspense of it, and I just enjoyed sort of being in that world. So yeah, no, I thought it was very strong, and there was the odd moment of humor. Like I enjoyed the moment with the whole like the thumbnail gag where it was literally a thumb. But that was pretty funny. He's planning a trilogy with it, so there should be a couple more films that, because it's Matt Reeves, who's like the Planet of the Apes director, the recent Planet of the Apes films.
Okay.
So he's got quite a bit of quite a bit of cred. So yeah, look forward to seeing what he does next.
Yeah.
So my next film is also a recent movie, and it's a thriller called Missing, which came out this year.
Okay.
So it's a tech thriller, and it's from the same people as a film called Searching from a few years ago. I don't know if you saw that, or same gimmick except reverse. So in the Searching, you had this character whose daughter went missing, and the whole thing is that he's a bit of a novice when it comes to computers, but the gimmick of the film was then everything you see throughout the film is on a computer, basically on a laptop.
Oh
So it's one of those, yeah. But it doesn't go in horror directions, but it is one of those where everything you see is on the computer, and it really feels authentic in that way. But that's sort of part of the thing, is that he uses the resources on that computer to try and track down his daughter, or to try and find out more stuff. So this reverses that Missing, because with this, it's like the teenage daughter who mother goes on holiday with her new boyfriend. And the mystery of it is then she doesn't hear from her for a long time. So she doesn't show up at the airport where she comes to meet her. So she doesn't know what happened. So she reports her missing. And then it's, as I said, it's the reverse. So I guess in this case, it's someone who probably spends all her time on like social media and online, compared with the older character in the previous film. So she has to try and, because like she gets the authorities involved, but there's only so much they can do. And because it's another country, you also have those barriers where she's trying to communicate with the local authorities. And there's certain stuff which she can find out on a laptop. Now, whether this is stretching credibility or not, but like it definitely digs into like the insane amount of information you can now access online. And I think that's an interesting side to the film, where it does make you think, is this a positive thing or is it a negative? And like, it's not really answering that for you. I think you can just make up your mind. So I think that's one of the most interesting things about the film, is that it definitely shows how being so open and allowing yourself to have, or allowing other people to have so much access to you online can be a bad thing. But it also shows the positives as well, you know, of that. So I think that's one of the most interesting things. She accesses certain things online. She's told by the local authorities, well, we can't really use that because it's not on the up and up, so to speak, the way you got it. But so that's the gimmick of the film, though. Then you see her on her laptop, you see her jumping around these various tabs and sites, and at one point she like contacts someone who does that sort of thing where you can hire him to like do that, like I guess like a private investigator. And there's just different things like where it literally follows it almost naturally how it would play out, where, because she's, I think it's Mexico, the country. So there's a point where she's talking to someone and they're talking in Mexican. So she has to look up like the translate sort of thing as it's like, as she's talking. So Storm Reid is the lead actress, and she was in the Invisible Man movie, and also she was in an episode of The Last of Us this year. So she has a couple of things that's worth checking out. And she's good. She's very natural and has a decent character arc. And so it's a solid movie. Like, it's a solid kind of like getting into like internet culture. And as I said, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? But it's just a different way to do a thriller where you can like have it play out that way, and the evidence and the clues are sort of through the technology. There's a really clever thing at the end of this. You know how when you've just watched something on Amazon, they will suggest something else to watch. Well, something like that popped up at the end of this, but it turned out to be in the movie, not on my actual thing.
Oh.
And again, I'll skate round spoilers, but what was really clever about it was like she'd just been watching an episode of this like true crime series, which is like fictionalized in the thing, and it was based on like the case with her mother. And the suggestion that came up was Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. So that's really funny because that sort of fits the theme of the thing. But it did fool me for a minute because it came up and I thought that was my Amazon doing that. So
I love when movies do that. It's fun.
yeah. So Missing, a recent movie. It's worth a look, I'd say. I'd probably prefer Searching a little bit more because by the end of Missing, I think the final part does go a little bit too much into like action type stuff, and whereas the movie leading up to that didn't really feel like that sort of movie. But it's only a small complaint, really. I think they're both worth watching. So Searching and then Missing.
I like the movies that mess with like the capabilities of technology, but as you said, it's like they kind of have to skate that fine line of like making it realistic enough to where you're like, oh crap, like, you know, we have the capability to do that. But then sometimes they just cross the line where you're like, okay, this feels like Mission Impossible, where it's like not in the realm of realism at all. But I am done with my movie, so go for it.
Okay, well, so I'm going back to the cheese a little bit here with my final pick, and that is, have you ever heard of the 80s movie Bloodsport? With no? Okay. I sort of thought it was one you might have at least have heard of. Okay, so Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, and it's a martial arts movie. That's the way to sum it up. So the plot of it is that he's a US soldier, even though he's Jean-Claude Van Damme. Worked that one out, and he's sort of gone AWOL, and the US are trying to bring him back because he's got really advanced martial arts skills. So they're trying to bring him back because they think he could be a useful weapon. But he's more interested in pursuing his passion, which is like martial arts and the tournaments out in Japan. So he's out in Japan where he's working his way up to compete in these tournaments. So you've got that plot, which plays out similar to like a Karate Kid movie where you build up to this big tournament at the end, and you see the different rounds of the tournament. So you see him work his way up, and of course, with it being the sort of movie it is, you've got this really over the top, like muscled up villain who's, the way it works out is, of course, the final is going to be Van Damme against this villain. And like, even though in reality, when you have this tournament, it's just like competition and there's no malice in reality. Like, just for the film, they have to make it like good guy versus bad guy type thing.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where he's being pursued at the same time. There's a little bit of a romance story. It runs through all the sort of cliches you've seen in these movies. His friend faces like this big monster bad guy who's going to make it to the final, and he really like hospitalizes his friend. So then that gives him extra motivation to go and kick his ass in the final. So it's that kind of thing. And it's fine. It's quite entertaining cheese. The fight scenes, I think for the time they were good. Maybe they don't hold up that well, but they are quite graphic at time, because there's this famous scene where like there's literally a bone hanging out of someone's leg. I'm not sure how well it looks now, like the effect of it, but it's still pretty shocking when you see it. And it's one of these really cheesy, quite entertaining movies. You just switch your brain off. It is actually based on a true story. Like, the Van Damme character is a real character. It says at the end of the movie. So, and it says about how he went on to set all these records and what have you. So that's quite interesting, at least. But it's pretty good, dumb fun. It like ticks the boxes. It's definitely more of a guilty pleasure movie. There's some ridiculously cartoon chase scenes, like when these like representatives of like the army are like chasing him through like Japan, and so there's a scene where they're chasing him through where you get like the boats, and he's like diving over the boats, and they're just like stumbling around, and they fall over at one point. They fall into the river. But it's just one of those things where it like he's not even moving that fast, sort of thing, and that you just got. Because one of them is Forrest Whitaker, like it's quite an early role for him. So he's reasonably young, whereas the other guy is like pretty old and like bumbling. And he's, I recognize the actor as well. He was in Diamonds Are Forever, the James Bond film. Like he was like Phoenix Lighter in that. But yeah, at this point he's getting pretty old. So he's really struggling to keep up. The guy playing like the Van Damme's character's friend, I've seen him in quite a lot of things. Like he's in an episode of The X-Files. I think he might be in Stop or My Mum Will Shoot. I think he might be in that. He tends to play like kind of biker style villains, like quite oddball type villains. So he's got a certain look to him, and the way he's introduced is just so like hilarious, because he's on a bus and Van Damme's on the bus as well, and he's just trying to chat up this Japanese woman, and he's like, it's something like, "Hey baby, you want to come home with a real big man?" And he like she can't understand him, and so he just keeps talking anyway, like he's oblivious to the fact that she can't understand like American. But then it's this really cartoony thing where Van Damme's rolling his eyes, but yeah, they still become friends, and like you're actually like meant to like this other guy, but it's just one of those movies where you just go with it, sort of thing. Like you're just meant to think he's a bit of a doofus, and then you sort of warm to him as the movie goes on. But yeah, it's a fun movie. It's a solid movie, I'd say, just for a switch your brain off. A bit of nostalgia for this sort of movie, and it's going back to my youth a bit, because my older brother always used to rent that type of movie on like VHS and bring them home on a certain night of the week. And it's one of those things where at the time I was a little bit too young to be watching it, but I would sit there anyway watching it with him. And it's a bit of a bonding moment. And it's one of those things where it just feels good to get away with it, sort of thing, where you are a bit under the age limit. Like,
yeah,
because when it becomes legal, it's not as much fun type thing.
I know, it's like growing up where you're like, oh, I can watch a rated R film, but I'm only 13 or whatever. But it's like, I feel like watching movies that are definitely a little bit for more mature audiences is like either it's a bonding moment or it's a potential like trauma. But that's awesome.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's a good, fun, dumb watch, basically. So yeah, that's Bloodsport.
Many people that would say this, but I started watching Ahsoka on Disney Plus.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
And I will say, at least so far, hopefully I don't eat my words from this, but so far it definitely seems a lot better than like Obi-Wan and oh man, there's one other Star Wars series that is kind of weaker. But with Ahsoka, they definitely made it very much her own show. And the storyline, it's like, yeah, there's some fanfare because of course it's a Star Wars series. Like they have to have like some like fan catering. But I feel like even if you're just watching the series for the sake of it being something to watch, like you can definitely get enjoyment out of it, because the storyline surrounding this particular series is strong enough that it very much holds out on its own. And then of course gotta talk about the fact that I need to, of course I need to know his name, but the guy that plays Anakin,
Hayden Christian, is it
yeah,
him?
that sounds right. But there's a scene where Ahsoka falls over a cliff, and she's having a vision, and he comes and like as her, because I don't know if you know much about Ahsoka, but she is actually
Not really.
she was Anakin's he was her master until he turned evil. So there's a lot of like weird dynamic on where it's like she's a Jedi, but it's like her former master ended up, turning evil. And this takes place after like I'm not gonna go that because I'm not strong enough in Star Wars to say timelines. But but the point is, it's like she's an adult and she's on her own acting as like a rogue Jedi. And a lot of the stuff comes up on like, well, is she actually does she actually fall within like the good Jedi? But whenever she has this vision about Anakin, it's so cool because he ends up having a lightsaber battle with her, and he flashes back and forth between Anakin and Darth Vader. And me and my husband were like, "Oh, this is so cool!" Oh, it's like if you're just gonna watch the series for that one scene, do it because it's worth it. It's so cool. But very solid series so far. We will see if it continues to be that way. But yeah,
Cool.
as far as like definitely a more solid Star Wars series that has more recently come out.
So are you quite big, like, into Star Wars, would you say? Sounds like you are.
It's like I've been watching the Star Wars series because my husband is a little bit more into it, because he played he likes to play like D&D and Pathfinders, and there was a tabletop version of Star Wars, and so he got to learn about a lot of the lore and canon and stuff like that. So he has a little bit deeper knowledge. So whenever he watches these TV shows, he's like, "Oh, they added that, or they are like showcasing this," and so it's like I watch it because of him, but it's like I do get enjoyment out of watching them.
Sure. Cool. Okay. Well, I haven't checked out any yet, but I know I've heard and there's been some positive things about it. Like it does sound like maybe one of the better ones of those shows. Like, because I know the other one is The Mandalorian that people tend to like as well. And
yeah, that one's really good too. Really the one that like, and Andor is really good too, but that one gets a lot more like political. And more into kind of like the background stuff, which is interesting, but it's a very different take of Star Wars. It's not as actiony. But the one that is definitely a mixed bag is Obi-Wan, because it's like on the one hand, it really scratches the nostalgia, but it's like as a show itself, it's like why did they do it? Like they kind of in a lot of ways, like kind of discredited Obi-Wan in a lot of different ways, but they did have some really cool scenes with Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. So it's like it didn't really need to be a thing, but I'm glad that I watched it.
The first TV show I'm going to talk about is a quite recent limited series. It's on Hulu, and you might have heard of the True Life case, actually, because it is in Texas. it's called Candy. If I say Candy, do you know the case I'm talking about? No?
No, though to be fair, Texas has a lot of
Well,
true
that's true.
crime stories because we're a big state, and it's Texas, so
Absolutely. That's all you need to say, really, isn't it?
yeah, it's Texas.
Okay. So just to give you the setup, yeah, it's based on a real life story. And it's about this housewife, Candy, who's played, or the surname's Candy, who's played by Jessica Biel. And it's about her killing her neighbor, who's played by Melanie Linsky. And they live in a very small, very religious like community in Texas. So like religion and kind of small knit communities, and the way people can gossip and the way things can transpire in that way becomes a big theme in the show. But what they do, which is a little bit different, is then the murder actually takes place in the first episode. So they get that out of the way. And
series
in
over.
that first yeah, that's the end of the show. It's actually really tense the way they do it, because you get a slow build up to it, and you don't actually see what happens. They leave that for like the final episode, but you see her go into the house, and then it's happened. And then it's really tense the way they do it after that, because you've got like the husband of the other woman who's away on work, so he has no idea what's going on. And you have him ringing round trying to get hold of her, and he obviously can't, and he ring round like the neighbors to try and get them to check in on her. So it's actually really, because you know that it's happened but this person doesn't, and you're following this person, it actually makes it really like uncomfortable to watch type thing. And they just make it really tense, like the build up to him finally finding out, even though you know what's already happened. So what happens then is the rest of the series, I think there's 5 episodes, so it's quite a short one. But the other episodes are just flashbacks to the events leading up to that. So it gives you a clear picture of these characters and kind of why she did the murder, like if there can be an explanation. But it's like you get a good sense of the characters, you get a good sense of how the Melanie Linsky character was a very like unlikable character at times around the community, or like how she did rub certain people up the wrong way. And it just digs deep into their lives. So you get like marriage type issues, you get gossip around the town, just different things. And it kind of occasionally it will cut to the present where they're like interviewing them as part of the investigation. And it does end with like the trial. The acting's really strong. Jessica Biel's very good. Melanie Linsky's very good. The supporting cast are good. You get a good sense of the period, like the feel for the period as well. And just the way they worked in the themes to do with religion and small town culture, that kind of thing. And there are like more light-hearted moments as well, which I appreciate, which you do need in this kind of thing. But yeah, it does feel very satirical. That is like the tone of it, I think. And there's quite a funny scene, for example, in, I think it's the second to last episode, where they're in like the house because they're trying to make their case against the Candy character. So you've actually got them doing the reenactments of how they think it went down in the house. So they're getting quite physical, where they're literally going into rooms doing like the actions that they think the character, like the 2 women, were doing. So it's actually quite funny to watch. They make it quite tense, as I said, at times. So that's Candy, which is on Hulu.
I know you said it was a small town. Do you know like what area of Texas it happened in?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. It was a few weeks ago I watched it.
Okay. The way that you described the show, I don't know if you've seen this series, but it very much reminds me about The Thing About Pam. That's a really good show.
With Renée Zellweger.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I might take a look at that. Yeah, I recommend Candy, and it's on Hulu, so if you've got Disney Plus, you can get it on there, and it's only 5 episodes, so it's quite an easy watch. So, because they also recently did another mini series based on the same case called Love and Death, and that was like a HBO one, but that one I heard mixed things, so I'm not sure if that's as good as this one. But yeah, I can recommend Candy anyway.
You might judge me for a little bit. So the one that I told you that I've been binging like through 6 seasons like this month is the series Once Upon a Time.
Okay.
And like, so it's like, on the one hand, I'm a sucker for fairy tales, so it itches my like fairy tale itch, but since it's made by the same people that did Lost, they go through that thing where it's like they just make it, they just have to do cliffhanger after cliffhanger, and sometimes the cliffhanger is like, oh yeah, this is great, and sometimes you just like leave the episode super pissed off.
Sure.
Because you're like, I can't believe they freaking did that. So have you heard of Once Upon a Time?
I have, and Rachel's quite a big fan. Like, she's mentioned it quite a lot. I didn't know it was from the same people as Lost, though. Actually,
yeah. I mean, whenever you watch the series, you're like, oh, that 100% makes sense, because they just try and do every single twist and turn. It's like, I'd say like the first 3 seasons are fairly solid, but then when they decide to bring in like the Wicked Witch of the West and then Frozen, it just goes downhill from there. So it's like, it's one of those series where it starts off good and you want it to be satisfying, but it doesn't quite hit that. But it's like, I'm like far enough in the series, so I'm like, I'm held hostage now. I just need to finish it and see how it ends. So it's like, it's one of those series where I'm like, if you like fairy tale stuff and you like when they play around, like one thing that was really interesting that I enjoyed that they do is in the 3rd season, they actually make Peter Pan evil, which is a really interesting concept, and it actually is really good. But then several seasons later, they decide to make King Arthur evil, and then, but then with him being evil, it's like every time he pops up on the screen, you're like, not this guy again. like you get excited when he dies because you're like, come on, just like end my suffering. So it's definitely a show that's a mixed bag. So it's like, if you don't like a series that it's like, if you don't like a series that doesn't like actually like satisfy that itch, then probably stay away from the show because it's going to drive you nuts. But if you just are able to sit back and enjoy the craziness and the cringe of watching a show about fairy tale characters, then you'll probably enjoy it.
Okay. I'll probably give it a look at some point. I think sometimes the title puts me off and the sort of show that I imagine it to be, but yeah, some of the stuff you just said sounds like it could be worth a watch at least. So
yeah, it's like I mean, of course, with it being fairy tales, they have to talk about hope and like good versus evil, all the normal like fairy tale stuff. But it's like, it's like you kind of have to watch the previous seasons to be able to understand the Peter Pan stuff. But the Peter Pan one, that's actually like one of my favorite, because it's like The way that they loop it into everything else is like pretty cool. And they do a really nice twist of like Peter Pan versus like his shadow. That's really interesting. But then as soon as they add the Wicked Witch of the West, like stay clear because it just goes downhill from there. Because they add Elsa and Anna. It's when Disney is like, oh, we're gonna start jumping on the bandwagon of what is currently popular, and then it starts feeling like a cash grab.
I have an answer for you about Candy where it was set. So
okay.
It's I'm a curious. Town. I think you say it Whale. Is it Wylie?
Oh, Wiley.
Riley. Yeah, Wiley, Texas.
Oh, okay. I mean, a lot of shit goes down in that area, so I'm not surprised.
You're not surprised. Hell yeah.
There's a whole long list of true crime stuff that has happened in Texas. I guarantee you 80% of it's in that area. So
oh man. Okay.
So don't move if you ever move to Texas, don't move to Wiley.
Yeah, there should be a warning on the way into town. Like, this is what you can expect. Be warned. So it's a suburban style town, and it's 1980s is when that whole thing took place. So still going strong then, by the sounds of it. 40 years later, still doing their thing. Next show is a show that I'm reviewing at the moment, so I won't say too much, but a tie into Lost, actually, which you just brought up. It's a show called From, which is from, well, one of the main writers on Lost. So it's a recent show. They've had 2 seasons now, and I know there is a 3rd season at some point on its way. And the premise is then it's set in like a small town, and this family comes through it on their way, like they're on like a camping holiday, keep going around in circles in a weird sort of Twilight Zone style way. And they end up crashing, and what then happens is like the residents, including this character Boyd, who's the local sheriff, played by Harold Pinio, who was in Lost, like he helps them settle into the town. And it's revealed them once you're trapped there, you can't really leave. And that's why he was trying to keep them out of the town, because he knew what was awaiting. So they have to like set them up in the town. There's all these different rules they have to follow, because you've got these creatures who can only come out after dark, and they come from the woods. So that's a whole rule. Because at one point when they've crashed their like RV and like a couple of the family members are injured, you've got the local like EMT who's like looking after them, but they've only got a set amount of time for her to look after them before the sun goes down. So I quite like that about it, because there's a sense of rules like that, like it presents a problem and they have to find a way around it, because realistically, like they can't really get them to the town in time with the injury, because like the boy, for example, is quite badly injured. So what they do is they do it in the camper van, but then they have to stay in the camper van overnight because these things are waiting outside. So you get this horror stuff where the things can talk to you and try and manipulate you like in your head. And that's kind of how they get to you. And if they convince you to like open the window or something, they can come in and attack you. So that becomes a whole part of it, where like there's things like they can hang talisman to like fend them off type thing. So it's like a sci-fi mystery where there's more revealed about what exactly is happening in this town and the past of it. And a bit like Lost, you get stuff where different residents come up with different ideas to try and find a way home or find a way out of the town. It definitely has a lot of parallels with Lost. You can see that it's from one of the same writers, because another big theme in Lost, which is a big theme in this, is the theme of religion and faith. That's big in this, like it was in Lost. And I've just finished the first season, so I've got another season to watch. And it's really solid. I would recommend checking it out. I think the characters are hit and miss. Like, there's definitely some characters that are warm to more than others. And that was a big thing in Lost. I think what made Lost so good is like the characters and the writing was so strong in Lost. And so it's almost like if you didn't quite get into the wacky sci-fi stuff, at least you could like enjoy the characters. It was a very character-driven show. So I think overall the characters in this aren't really on that sort of level, but there are a few that I do like, and it's quite a well-told story, I think, overall, from what I've seen. It's a good part for Harold Pinio as well. Like, he is playing quite similar to his character in Lost. I think he's a very good character who you have a lot of, like, empathy for. And the horror moments are well done. Like, the first couple of episodes are really suspenseful. So that's something as a horror fan I appreciate. So yeah, I'm not going to say it like totally nails it. Like, there's probably a couple of episodes I weren't so keen on in season 1, but it's solid. I definitely say it's worth a look, and I'm reviewing it on the channel, so I sort of see how I go. But so far, after one season, I would say it's definitely worth a look. So that's From.
Yeah, I want to say that Jess has been watching that show, and she's been bugging me to try and start watching it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about that show.
Yeah, I would say if you're into like sci-fi mystery type things, then it could fit into that niche for you quite nicely.
My last TV show has been season 3 of Ted Lasso. Nice. That it's like, it definitely is not a show for everyone. It's definitely a feel-good show where there's a little bit of drama, but it's mostly like good vibes and just like a little bit of tension, so that way it comes out like hopeful at the end of each episode. It's like, I don't really enjoy sports, but the way that they convey the show, it's like, even if you don't enjoy sports, you can definitely still like get a lot from it. The characters are definitely very strong in the show. Like, each character is very distinct, and you can very much like pick your favorites. But it's like, I mean, most of the characters are very enjoyable. Even the character, like, there's this one character named Nate who kind of like betrays the team and then goes off and coaches for like a different team. And but then you end up kind of figuring out where his mentality comes from, and he kind of transitions back to coming back to reality and realizing what he was doing was kind of shit. And so he kind of has like a redemption arc in a way. But yeah, and then by far my favorite character is Roy, because he's just like absolute, like, says what's on his mind, and and just is very like serious, but then whatever comes out of his mouth ends up like making the scene funny. But yeah, a really enjoyable series if you haven't watched it. It's a good series if you just need some couch time and need to feel hopeful at the end of the evening and have some positivity in your life.
Yeah, that's what I've heard about it. Really, I've still only seen the first episode because I did that a long time ago for a pilot stream. So I've still only seen the first one, but I enjoyed that, and I always hear good things about it. So it's definitely one to go back to at some point. And
yeah. And it's nice that it actually ends at season 3. So it's not one of those series where they're like, oh, we're going to keep going on and on and on until we stop getting support. Like they have a solid cutoff. So so they are able to close out the series a bit better than this like Dexter or some of the other series where they're like, oh, we're just gonna keep going on and then quickly wrap it up when we get canceled.
My next pick is a show I started last night, actually, so I've watched the first 2 of these. It's an Australian show called Black Snow. So this is a thriller, and so it just started in the UK on like the BBC last night. And the setup for it is then a time capsule unveiled at this local school, because it's like a 25-year thing. So it's a time capsule which was set up back in 94. So it's like the 25th anniversary. So they're revealing like the contents of it in the present. And that brings back up a murder case from the past, from the time, because one of the girls who was involved in the time capsule, she was mysteriously killed back then. So you've got her sister who's now grown up and she has a daughter of her own. And you've got her mother who's now quite elderly. But it brings up, it re-emerges tensions, because at one point, like the daughter of the sister of the girl, she reads out a note, and the note implies that there might be like dodgy stuff going around the town, like predators. The word predators is used, so it just brings up old sort of wounds. And the case is like reopened because you get a new detective who comes in from out of town, so he starts looking at it again, looking at the evidence from the time, and he also like gets the contents of the time capsule to like comb through that. So you sort of get it flashing back and forth between the past and the present. So we slowly start to see what went down in the past, and that kind of presents us with a list of potential like killers who might have had reason to do it. And one conclusion they draw quite early is that it was someone close to the girl, someone who actually knew her, because one development is that they seem to have like put something into the time capsule, and it was something which, well, it's a lock of hair basically, so it's something which they've gotten off her like body, so and it's in the time capsule, so it looks likely that it's someone close to her rather than it just being like a stranger type thing. So that's the setup, and it also gets a bit into like Australian culture and like the kind of race culture in Australia where it comes to like Aboriginal sort of people. So it gets a bit into that to do with like kind of racism and stuff like that. So that stuff is very well done, because as someone who's a bit of an outsider to that stuff, it's quite an interesting look at it. And so far so good. Like we've had 2 episodes, and they are very strong episodes. Like you get a sense of the mood and atmosphere. I think the acting's good so far as well, very natural, and as I said, some interesting ideas, some like good meaty themes, but a very like good slow burn watch as well when it comes to the suspense of it. So far, yeah, I'm really liking it. And all episodes, if you live in the UK, all episodes are on BBC iPlayer now. So you've kind of got a choice where you can either watch them all in a binge type thing, or you can watch it weekly. They have like double bills weekly, so it's kind of up to you. And yeah, but Black Snow, I'd recommend checking out. Yeah. So,
yeah, that sounds really interesting. Yeah.
Definitely worth a look. I mean, I'm sure you can probably find it somewhere in the US, but Okay, so I have a couple more to talk about. So my next one, which I've been watching on streams this week, is the second season of Chucky, the Chucky TV
Oh.
show. Yeah. So this is a very entertaining show. If you're a fan of Chucky, I think you will really enjoy it. Like, it obviously continues on from the story from like the most recent Chucky films, which themselves had become a bit more serialized because they brought in elements from past films. So it actually makes a lot of sense, and they moved it onto like TV. So the first season was a bit slow getting going, and I think partly because they did that thing where they didn't want to isolate any casuals who had never seen any of the movies. So they almost treated it a bit as like a fresh start. And it was a bit of a weird one at first because they sort of treated it as a bit of a teen drama, but which just happened to have Chucky stuff going on. But then what they did is after like sort of episode 3, it became more of a horror show where it became the kids teaming up to try and take Chucky out. So that became a much more satisfying premise if you're a fan of like the movies. And so this second season, it pretty much hit the ground running and was a lot of fun. And at this point, they've obviously worked in like the regular characters from the movie. So Tiffany's a big part of it. Nico's a big part of it. You've got Andy returning in like a cameo. So a lot of different people than you've seen in the movies. And the main setting for season 2 is like a convent, basically, because it's decided by this therapist at one point. Then because the kids have got into trouble, she ships them off to this religious place, and that's like the main setting for the season. You also get Devon Sawyer returning, who was in season 1, and I think there's just going to be a running gag with him where he just cast as a different character in each season, because in season 1 he played like twins and like both characters were killed off. So in this season he's playing like a priest. So I'm convinced he'll show up in season 3, but just as a different character probably. But he's good in it as well, and there's a lot of fun with Jennifer Tilly. I will say there's an episode about halfway through the season which is absolutely hilarious, where it's like a murder mystery setup, and it's all focused on the Tiffany character at her house. And you get lots of meta humor because you've got her sister, Meg Tilly, in the episode playing herself. And you also get, as he's called, Joe Pantoliano. And you also get Gina Gershon, and those 3 actors were in the film Bound years ago, so they're making references to that movie, but like they're just playing themselves. And they do a whole thing where the butler ends up getting killed, so you get the classic "Who Killed the Butler?" So the whole episode is just this fun meta like gag fest, and you've got like a murder mystery to it and lots of clever like reveals. It also works in the kids very nicely, and also it's bookended with Chucky himself because he introduces it as like he's doing like his own sort of talk show. So you kind of get it bookended with him introducing it. It's done in chapters, and then you get a wraparound at the end with Chucky, which is really funny as well. So that episode is an absolute blast, and it's just a nice thing in the middle of the season. But season 2, I really enjoyed. I would say season 2 is maybe even better than season 1. So I think if you're a fan of Chucky and the movies, you should enjoy the show, I would say. And season 3 is on its way. It starts in October, so not too long to go now. So I take it you haven't seen any of the show yet.
I keep meaning to, because this isn't the first time you've brought it up, and so I'm like, man, I really need to get on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I plan to watch it, and then you talking about it just makes me want to watch it more. So I'll eventually get to it.
Yeah, it should be a decent binge watch because, like, each season so far, there's only been 8 episodes, so that's not
Oh,
going to
okay.
take you to watch. Final one, which I've only seen 2 episodes of, but it's a new Amazon show called Wilderness with Jenna Coleman, who was in Doctor Who, and it's basically a soap / thriller type thing where you get this seemingly happy couple who moved from the UK to New York because the Jenna Coleman character has got a new job there. So it's her trying to settle into New York life, cut off from her family back home. And she finds out that the husband has cheated on her. So we get a revenge style plot, but it's kind of played out really slowly where it keeps teases as she finds out more about his life and what he's not telling her. It teases, is she going to kill him here? Is she going to like just play a game where she strings him along? That kind of thing. So it's a very heightened sort of thriller / soap. So I've watched the first 2 and I quite enjoy it so far. I would say episode 2 was better than episode 1. I think episode 2 is where it got going more, where you got a bit more into like the thrills of it. And she's good. I think she's good in the role. Like, she's really digging her teeth into it. The actor, the main actor, is the one in The Invisible Man who played the husband, and he's also in The Haunting of Hill House. He played Luke in that show, so he's popped up in a few things, and he's a decent actor. Like, I don't know if I'm quite liking him so much in this, but it's, as I said, 2 episodes in, so there's 6 episodes overall, so quite an easy watch. But definitely I would say I got more into it in episode 2, and I've heard different things. I've heard mixed things on it, so yeah. That's The Wilderness, or Wilderness, which is on Amazon Prime now. Are there any things coming out which you have your eye on, or anything else you want to take a look at?
The new Goosebumps series that's coming out on Disney Plus on, I think it's October 13th. But really looking forward to that because as a kid, I really enjoyed the Goosebumps series and enjoyed the books. And they helped reinforce my fear of dummies and dolls. But really looking forward to that series coming out. I'm interested to see how they approach it and where they end up taking it. So.
Okay, so that's one to look for. And just on something I was saying a minute ago, I know in October, one of the big horror shows is The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix. So that's the new Mike Flanagan show, who did Haunting of Hill House. So that's based on an Edgar Allan Poe, and there was a film in the 60s with Vincent Price. So, but this is a new version, and you've got some of Flanagan's regulars. You've also got Mark Hamill in there, so you've got quite the cast. So that's definitely one on my radar for next month. We'll be covering that on the channel. So that could be fun, because I think for some it might be nice to see Flanagan get back into the horror stuff. The Chucky season 3 is coming. There's also just, and this is more a me thing, but I know there's a doc series on Netflix called The Wrestlers, which I'm quite interested in because being a wrestling fan. But that does sound pretty good by the sound of it. It's about I think it's Ohio Valley Wrestling, which is a small like feeder promotion, and it's about them trying to stay in business and trying to put on shows and things like that. So that sounds like it could be quite a engrossing little watch. That's done for the month. Thanks, guys, for listening. Let us know your picks in the comments. What have you been watching this past month? I'll thank Alyssa again for coming on, and we'll definitely have her back in a few months as well. But before we go, I'll give you a chance to plug your channel.
You can find me and my co-host at Horror Movie Tea, where we review horror movies. Never would have guessed. And we do also stream horror games, which we'll release the parts of. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Keith.
No problem. I'll post their links in the description anyway. So go and follow them, because they're getting quite close to 200 subs. So help them to get there. That would be good. And yeah, thanks, Alyssa. We'll definitely have you on again soon. So thanks a lot. Before I leave, I'll just plug the next time I do one of these, my co-host will be Lady Sasha from the What Did I Just Watch channel. So that's a big one, because it'll be spooky season, October, and she's big into horror movies. So she'll be the next guest for the October edition. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Let us know what you think of some of our picks. Let us know what you've been watching as well. And once again, you can support the channel on Patreon at patreon.com/borednow for just $1 a month for some extra perks. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.